Jesus more.
St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, from verse 35, asks the question, what can separate me from the love of Christ? What can separate me from the love of Christ? And he says, can persecution, can tribulation, can distress, can peril, can nakedness separate me from the love of Christ? And later on it talks about persecution, not neither death, nor life, nor angel, nor principality, nor death, nor height, no present issues, no future issues can separate me from the love of Christ. My dear brothers and sisters, we find this love and the love that these people have for Christ and for God in the first reading. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The prophet Daniel wrote while the prophet Daniel is one of the exilic prophets, so he prophesied when the people were in exile. So this story happens while the people of God, the Israelites, the people of Judah, the tribe of Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah, they had been taken into slavery. And these three wise men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because of their love for Christ, because of their love for God, they did not give in to the demands of Babylon, because that was the biggest temptation there. The people of the Jewish people, the people of Israel, had believed in God right from the very beginning. They had the temple as their center, they had their way of worship and all that. They had their priests who offered sacrifices in a way that was peculiar to them. God was very close to them in every way. And now they are in Babylon in exile, and they are forced to follow the ways of the Babylonians. And some of them gave in to that. When the king brought this image and said all of them should worship this image, many of them gave in to that because of the fear of being persecuted, except these three men who said, we are not going to let go of what we believe in. Nothing is going to separate us from the love that we have for God. And because of that, they had a risk of losing their lives, but they were not even afraid to let go. They were not afraid to lose their lives insofar as they lost it, believing in the God who had saved them. And we know, of course, that at the end of the story, they were put into the fiery furnace and they were burnt alive, but nothing happened to them. They came out. God delivered them from that because of the faith they had in Christ Jesus. Another similar story would be the story of the martyrs of Uganda, whose feast day is coming up very soon on June 3. All these people who had not really had a deep knowledge of God, but they had a lot of love for God. Actually, the place where these martyrs were murdered is now called Nyamugongo, which means on the back. And it comes out after what had happened to them. They were dragged for several kilometers on their backs. They tied them and they dragged them on rocks and everything. And by the time they arrived, their backs were peeled off. They were still alive, but their backs were peeled off completely. And then they were persecuted. They chopped their hands. They did not want them to die. They just wanted them to suffer and to deny the love they had for Jesus. And they chopped up their hands and they would not do anything. They would not give in. Others were pierced with the sword and different things were happening. And while they were persecuting, like for instance, if they brought one of them and they were persecuting, then they would bring all the others to see what is happening so that they would deny their faith. And out of that, none of them gave in. They still loved Christ. And in the end, when they had not died, they put firewood around them and they burnt them from their legs, from their toes. They just put a little fire so that they would feel the pain. And in that, they started singing praises to God and they died slowly. My dear brothers and sisters, these are all demonstrations of people who had love for Christ, love for God. They never gave in, they never compromised that with anything. These days, when you ask people, why did you not go for Mass? You hear the little things that separates them from God, you will be so amazed. Father, I slept, I overslept. Sleep, just sleep, separates people already these days from the love of Christ. Or you ask people, you say, no, I have this person who comes to church and I don't like that person. And therefore I don't want to come to that church where that person is. I've had many of those kind of situations. People who don't go to church just because one person is going to that church and they don't want to see that person. And that becomes an obstacle. That becomes, what is separating them from the love of Christ. Others will say, Catholic Christians are hypocrites. They go to church, but when they come back, they behave differently. So what? I mean, we already fall in the sin of being judgmental. We don't go to church because we are perfect. We go to church because we are sinners in need of God's mercy. I mean, if somebody separates himself from God just because of what other people are doing, it does not make sense. You begin to ask yourself, what is it that makes me not to even come for Mass on some days? What is it that makes me not to have that love for Christ? I realize very little things nowadays. No, Father, sorry, I'm so busy, I cannot go to Mass because I'm so busy, I have a lot of work. So work becomes the real thing that separates us from God. Oh, no, Father, I was walking on my phone and then I realized Mass time had passed, so I was playing my games or other things that we do on our mobile phones, and then we prefer those things to the love that God has for us. And it's a pity because there have been great examples like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Jesus himself being persecuted, as we hear today in the gospel, and he never gave up the will of the Father, showing us an example and giving us an example of what it means to become followers of Christ. The martyrs of Uganda and many other martyrs like Saint Maria Goroti, who did not, even in spite of all the pain that she went through, she never gave up the love she has for God. And St. Paul says, what can separate me from the love of God? I just want us to stay with that question throughout our day and ask ourselves, especially when we go through the day without even saying one prayer, without saying a rosary, without reading our scriptures, just ask yourself, what is it that made me not to pray my rosary today? What is it that made me not to say my morning prayer today? What is it that made me not to say my evening prayer today? What is it that is separating me from the love of God?
Kiss us, mother, kiss your children. Bring God's blessings from above. With your mantle blue enfold us in your gentle holy love. See the darkness disappear.